we're all going to have things that are really devastating and that have the
Mhm.
power, quite frankly, if you give it to stop you in your tracks, to make you
Mhm.
crawl up into a ball and get in the corner and just give up at least, and at worst, really give up, which I know some people who've done that as well,
Right.
like give up
Right.
on life, which is tragic. So again, I needed to step back and double click on that because that is so much of what led to this conversation is
Yeah.
my dealing with more than one, more than two individuals who are our peers in terms of our age group, being male, being black, that have really struggled and have really struggled to continue to move forward
That's
in a
right.
way that seems healthy.
That's right. Well, I think let's peel back that onion even more. Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. I'm really excited, guys, because today will be the 200th episode of the podcast. I'm pretty amazed by that and so happy that you guys have joined me on this journey as we've shared so many messages of healing. And as a way to celebrate today's episode, I wanted to focus on the E in the ROPE acronym, which focuses on life experiences that make us who we are. It is my belief that our personal experiences shape our beliefs, our values, and perceptions of our lives. You know, these experiences can and have been significant in our lives, and it's really what shapes, you know, who we are, how we interact with the world, and how we make decisions day to day. So today, I wanted to share just a little of my journey and the journey of my good friend from the perspective of two men trying to make it in a world filled with so many challenges. We'll talk a little bit about some of our experiences at college, some of our struggles faced as Black men in America, and of course, some of our insights into how we overcame them. And I'll do that with one of my best friends, which is Dobbin Bookman, who is a highly accomplished human capital strategist and talent organizer with an extensive background in executive education, leadership development, and corporate consulting. A lot of that he did at Harvard, but now he's kind of doing his own thing with his own business, which I'll ask him about in a moment. Like myself, he attended the wonderful, historically Black college, Xavier University in Louisiana, which we both love. And he also went on to get his MBA and his Master's of Science from Harvard, where he served to lead various programs there in the past, including a focus on family business, private equity, and wealth management. He's worked with entrepreneurs and executives across sectors such as healthcare, energy, real estate, professional services, et cetera, and is really good at, succession planning, coaching, and, helping people map out their careers. So with that, my friend, it's been a long time coming, and I'm so excited to welcome you to the Protecting Your Nest podcast.
Thanks. Good morning to you, and good morning to everyone. I'm delighted to be here. First, let me say, as you were describing all of that, a lot of stuff was running through my mind. Not the least of which is how to address you, and just to bring the audience into the context of our long-term relationship. And for I've known Tony. I'll call him Tony for now.
That's
I
right.
know you
That's
guys
right.
know him as Dr. Hampton, but with all respect, Doc, this is, it's an honor to be here. But I just so you all know in the audience, I know him as Tony from down the
That's
hall.
right.
We don't same mics, which is dorm.
That's
So
right.
anyway, you said a mouthful when you just described this idea of being a black man
Hmm.
in this today, trying to you know you know be positive and at the very least just kind of make it day to day. And it's a struggle for so many people, and it's a struggle for some to the point that it's debilitating.
Hmm.
I think it's a struggle for everyone, even folks like, frankly, the two of us who externally may not look like to many people we see day to day that we are mentally, fatigued, at least, and in many cases, and in some cases, actually struggling and trying to, make it day to day. So this is a great conversation. Thanks for teeing it up.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I agree, and I'm happy you, share some of those perspectives. And I think it's important as we get accustomed to maybe even hearing people who we haven't heard from before, to kind of peel the onion back a little bit and say, well, who is this person I've been following in this low carb space, and what about this buddy of his, and where does he fit in? So I think people will be intrigued by that journey, and it kind of I kind of want to start there, because you said St. Mike's, which was our old dormitory. We spent many days there, and I don't know how we started our friendship. I just know that we had a lot in common, and there's a lot of distractions in college. And Xavier was a wonderful school, but there's a lot of fun in New Orleans. So you can easily get caught up in the fun and forget why you came there. But for me, you were exactly what I needed in that moment, which was some structure. You were I don't know where you ended up ranking, but you certainly was one of the top male students at Xavier, if not the top. And so, in a school with 70% or so female, that could be a challenge. So I just want to tee up how we study. Like, one of the things that was unique about our studying, which was I'm sneaking into your room, your roommates, who was a physics major. Shout out to Stanley, who allowed me to be in that space. And although we kind of did our own thing, it was nice to be around someone who was so academically focused that when there was a question, or, hey, what's your thoughts on this, it was nice to have you there to kind of support that. But most importantly, to be in a space where we could focus when the rest of the school was doing some other stuff, at least a portion. So, but we always listened to musical jazz. Now, I'm a Chicago guy, and don't get me wrong, it was house music in Chicago, and that's for
House.
another podcast, house music, right? But you brought this jazz, and of course, it was musical, and that really allowed for me to study in an environment. So, where did this jazz thing come from, and why is that such a big part of your life right now?
Well, thanks for asking. Again, you're saying such a mouthful. Jazz connects in my life and is a sort of a stream, a red thread, if you will, through my life from the earliest conceptions. And it will come in and out of this conversation during the time we have together in some other ways. But the first thing I'll say is the root of my love and appreciation for jazz is directly from my father.
Hmm.
My father was what I would call, probably among other things, a Renaissance man. He was a musician. He was an artist. He was good at sales. He did all sorts of things. But one of the things I recall is just his extensive, album collection. They don't have albums as much anymore, but record collection. It was always music in the house. We had a very nice, back then they called them a hi-fi system. We had a very nice stereo, and we were always listening to music. So that's where that came from. Um, the transition to sort of the second part of your conversation, which is the meat of it, which is how we interacted as students and were focused. Again, that attitude, that sort of spirit and momentum from me came from a place, quite frankly, not of being a diligent student, which I'll honestly tell you, in high school, I was an average student. I was a B plus, sometimes B minus, occasionally C plus student, and had a great time. As soon as I got to Xavier, my freshman year, I immediately started experiencing extreme academic success in a way that I had never before. So many people at Xavier probably did not know. They just assumed that I was kind of this, you know, 4.0 guy that was diligent the whole time. That was a real pivot for me.
Wow.
And let me and here's the real interesting part about it, which ties to this conversation. That was a coping mechanism. I
Mm.
literally was, and have throughout my life at different times, I'll say suffered or at least experienced anxiety and just, needing to calm down, being an introvert, which other people probably wouldn't appreciate, but needing to kind of have time alone. But when I got to Xavier, I was anxious. I quite frankly was not like thrilled at being away from my hometown of Houston and being at Xavier. I went to Xavier because someone literally just a few months before I applied told me about Xavier, which was during my senior year. I didn't even know about Xavier. He was at
Wow.
another University in pre-med. He said, "Hey, if you want to be a doctor," which I had established I wanted to do, he said, "the school you need to go to as a black person is Xavier." This is a guy from
Hmm.
another HBCU telling me this as a
Wow.
first. And I said, "Xavier, never heard of it." So I looked it up, went to Xavier. But all that to say, I was not thrilled about being in a dorm, living with a roommate. None of that I
Right.
liked. So my mechanism for coping with that was, let me get in my books, let me put my earbuds in, and let me go to the library and just bury myself in this thing. And that's what led to the success, literally. And then over time, a short time, I, got a lot of joy from that success and then relationships. And then it
That's
started to be a
right.
place I loved. But that wasn't how it started.
Wow. And it's certainly, as you have suggested, not the perception that I had. I just assumed that you were just this guy who went to Xavier with the foundation of academic success. I don't even know, I don't even recall us talking a lot about your dad and learning about your dad as the foundation, being a man of music himself. And so it's really kind of cool. And that's why I love these conversations because, we talk, but and we've had our experience in the past, but man, you can get to know somebody even as you introduce them to the rest of the world. So it's really very fun, very interesting. So I want to go back a little bit though, and not just think about your dad, but just your foundation as a person growing up. Uh, Anything about your youth, those early years, that really helped define the man you've become?
Yeah, yeah. And again, I love all the threads that link this conversation. Transitioning from what I just said about not being a rigorous student in high school and junior high, I grew up in a very education focused and based family. Both
Hmm.
of my grandparents had master's degrees. This was in like the 40s, and
Oh
they were
wow.
both academics and taught in university or in school, at least in high school and other. And so that education and doing well in school and being the link and equate between sort of success and hard work and study and kind of outcome and success, so to speak, in life was very clear to me. There was never any question about college or school or study. So that was a part of a
Yeah.
big foundation for me. The another piece of this was just, I'll say, just strong black women, and I mean that's another
Mhm.
thing, probably also for another podcast. But uh, I mentioned my father, who was influential certainly in the realm of my appreciation of jazz and some of the arts. Um, and we'll get into some of this, I'm sure, maybe later on. But my dad was only a part of my life for a very short part
Mhm.
until I was probably about 8 years old. So all this influence of music and all that came prior to me and up until I was 8. After that, it was a very different sort of
Mhm.
foundation and context for me, which we can get into. But that was another sort of key, what I'll call crucible element, and I'll come back to that word in a moment. The Another element of it was that I grew up in the South. I grew up in
Mhm.
Houston, Texas, which well, we'll get into politics and things, but was a very different context for me, uh, given not just that it was Houston, because I was familiar with Houston. My father was from Houston, but I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. My family, I and was one of very few uh, blacks at my junior high school. Uh, I went to a high school that was not my zoned high school. I went to sort of called a magnet high school, which did change the demographics because it was by design. I grew up, everybody on my street was white, and I was, um, so that was a really other another sort of element and dimension that I will say didn't get, I don't want to say corrected or didn't get adjusted or put into what I call my current context until first I went to high school and that demographic changed. But then I went to Xavier, which, back to my first point, was my first sort of, immersion in, like, I was like, holy, this is crazy. I mean, and it was great, it was great. But it was a different cultural dimension for me. So that was the progression, really. And then from there, everything has sort of been rooted. I mean, I call Xavier, quite frankly, not discounting any of what I just described because that was all fundamental, but Xavier was sort of the nucleus
Hmm.
of who I am right now,
Yeah.
relative to the evolution of.
I love that. And I'm also grateful that we're talking about historically black schools. My kids ended up at WashU in St. Louis. Shout out to WashU, and who has $500,000 of my dollars in their pocket. But and I do not regret that. I tried to I literally dropped them off at Xavier for a weekend. I said with all of these girls and fun, I said they're going to be interested, but they were in an environment at their school which was really focused on highly ranked schools. Not Xavier's probably ranked number 6 for historically black schools, but in terms of the bigger context, University of Chicago, Northwestern, WashU, et cetera. So they were kind of being led down that rabbit hole. But I thought that was going to get them, but it didn't work. So, but having said that, I really appreciate the Xavier experience. I also want to say, in my family, a little different. Number one, the education part was not emphasized in the way it was for you because my mom was working, at Nestle's making, peanut butter, Butterfingers and things like that, she just wanted her kids to do well. I don't think I had the same kind of expectation. It just kind of worked out. And I certainly didn't have my father in my home. She was a single mom. So in some ways, similar but different. And then, although Xavier was, when you go to a black school, it is kind of an aha moment, even for a person who was unlike you, I was in a more diverse background, more black, I guess. But still, when you walk into a school where everybody's, for the most part, except for the pharmacy school, was looking like you, it's aha moment. But it's also an amazing thing to be around people who are all trying to get an education and focus on that. So it was really a great experience. So you don't have to go to a historically black school, and you don't have to go to a WashU. You just have to do, but by doing some diverse things, like my elementary school historically is black, high school, Lane Tech High School in Chicago, white, Xavier, black, Jewish medical school. So all of that back and forth really helps to shape you into a person who can now navigate in a world where it requires that type of navigation. So I really thank God for the Xavier experience. And one of the things about Xavier, which probably keeps it in the top 6, is that it was the only Black Catholic college in the country, which is still true, but it's also fairly rigorous while nurturing. So, and I remember Dr. Carmichael we had chemistry lab literally in a mobile home. It was crazy. It's a
You
lot
did
different than in fact,
a
chemistry
temporary
lab.
building, yeah.
We're not making this up, guys. We had chemistry lab in a mobile home, and Dr. Carmichael and others who they just nurtured us, but they had high expectations. So they made sure we were ready for medical school if that was our path, and they did a great job. So, in what way? I know you kind of touched on it. How did Xavier, from you, particularly coming from this more Caucasian white environment to a historically black environment, in what way did it shape you?
Yeah, yeah. So again, you're saying so much, and I want to make sure I capture it all. So back to where you just started. I want to pick up even where you were talking about with your kids and going to wash you and sort of
Yeah.
this back and forth, this black and white experience.
Right.
We both had that. It's interesting. I didn't resonate with it until you just
Yeah.
described it. Again, white environment, then black school, then I went to white graduate programs, and so same thing. So I think that's critical. I think that which I'll call it an ambidexterity, if you will, sort of ability to kind of be bilingual or
That's right.
bicultural is a critical element for folks of color, and I think it is a challenge. I mean, you described also the challenge of your kids growing up in an academic environment where rank and where you're going. The same
That's
thing
right.
with my kids. I grew up, we didn't mention this yet. My adult life has been in Newton, Massachusetts, where
Mm,
I've been for over 25 years with my wife and my 2 adult children now. But we've educated them up north, and we've been right now, we still live in a predominantly white neighborhood, different from where I grew up in Houston, obviously. But their schools, top ranked in the country, high schools, and everyone as well was about these top ranked largely PWY
That's right.
institution. And we didn't have to really push hard. We did the same thing you did. We dropped our kids off at Xavier and Morehouse for summer
That's right.
programs and got them
That's right.
exposed. And both of them, you know, did happen to choose HBCUs. My daughter
Hmm.
actually is an alum of Xavier, where we both went. She's
Nice.
now a first year medical student, believe it or not, in Louisiana.
That's
It's great.
amazing.
And my son went to Morehouse and
Nice.
is a is a professional coach in Boston with athletics. And so it's a back and forth. So let me get to your question about how Xavier really impacted and shaped me, kind of coming into that shocking environment, and shocking in a good way. It forced so much on me. It forced a discipline which I had in me, obviously, but I had not exercised. And so that was a good and developmental activity that was timed appropriately in university. And so
Amen.
that was one thing. It introduced me to people like you and others of our friends who have gone on to do great things
That's
and
right.
and learn about different backgrounds. I mean, you talked about house. I'd never heard of that term. I remember when you introduced it, you said, "Hey, house music." I was like, "Wow, it's actually called house music. That's interesting. You pay it in a house," and it was crazy. And you know, all of our friends from all over, and so all of that really began to, you know, pardon the pun, really color in my kind of
Right.
background. I mean, from the standpoint of fleshing it out and filling out sort of spaces that had been really non-experienced elements that are so critical to being who you need to be
That's
in
right.
this world as a black man in particular.
That's right.
So it did all of that for me.
Yeah.
And everybody on, you know, in St. Mike's, on the floor and around, were just such a key part of that, you know.
Yeah. It's it's cool as I'm trying to be as present as possible as we talk, man. And that's why I'm really enjoying this, and I hope our audience does too. But it's almost like we kind of needed each other, right? So I'm adding an element, beyond the house music, right? And you're adding the jazz music, but it was so much more. And I think we kind of needed each other. I needed a little more discipline. You had come there with for a different reason, able to focus. I and I had, shout out to my previous roommates even who were not as focused as you were, but they also added value because they taught me how to relax. And maybe even I helped you with that because
You
eventually, and
did.
we'll touch on the fraternity. I was like, dude, you got to have some fun when you're here too. And although you didn't fully dive into deep water, we were able to kind of help each other. And I tell you, it literally makes me emotional thinking about how important it was that we took a part of each other, just like a marriage, right? I have my wife. My wife is completely different than I am. She's more cautious. In fact, I'll give you this quick story. My youngest son, he graduates from grad school. He gets an email. We were referred to you by the school, and there's an opportunity, and it was kind of a job opportunity. But my wife read, so I didn't even look at the email. I said, "Great, look into it, go for it." My wife says, "Let me see that email." So she reads the email, and one of the things it said in the email was some exchanges of funds, and she was like, so my wife, right? She knew, and so, but that's what I love is that people who are either friends or in a marriage or beyond, even as colleagues, we add value to each other. And that's why diversity is so important, because the value I add to an organization is different than the other person, and that's why we have to embrace it. It's okay to be different, and I just think that is so vital. So really hearing you express the value I've added to your life and me expressing what you did for me is amazing. So let's really quickly, because you're supposed to be a doctor colleague with me. I'm like, I thought we are going to be helping to heal everybody, and now you're in business. So what shifted you from this pre-med, which is what Xavier's known for, pre-med, pharmacy, et cetera, to this whole business thing?
Yeah, yeah. So now life gets interesting. We get into the twists and the turns and the
That's right.
other crucibles of life. This will be fun. So before we go there, let me take one step back, because we both
Yes.
have not done something or said something that we should have, or maybe that I didn't realize that you just said that. I'll tell you two other things. One each we both got from HBCUs and a great Xavier experiences is our wives.
Amen.
We both met
Ooh, that's
who we're married
true.
to now at Xavier.
Could you say
There's
something
another
real
one.
just say real quick, really quick, just say something about your wife because she was also one of the top students at Xavier at the time. So maybe that's what connected you guys. Just real quick, say something about your lovely wife.
Yeah, Jocelyn, Dr. Jocelyn Joseph Bookman. She's fantastic. She's was then and still is even more so a pillar, a line of stability in my
Hmm.
life. She's just been a blessing. And I've told her this many times. I literally would not be standing here, and maybe not anywhere, were it not for her.
Hmm.
Um, and she also was pre-med. It's funny you mentioned that we actually have a photograph at our graduation with the dean that had the top, I think it was 10 students at the school.
Hmm.
We're both in that photograph. I'm at one
That's
end
right.
and she's at the other. But it's a great thing. But she's great. And yeah, we connected as friends. I mean, we met as freshmen. We were just friends for most of the time we were at Xavier. Quite frankly, we didn't start a dating relationship until my senior year. Our
That's
senior year.
right.
And so we were academic friends and colleagues. We were both part of a scientific scholar program called the Mark
Hmm.
Scholar Program. And we
Yep.
used to
I
travel
remember that.
and we had a fellowship around that. And so we connected around that and we were just friends.
I love
Uh,
that.
yeah,
How many
yeah.
years now? How many years?
Oh my God, 30. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary.
Well, I'm a little
Long time.
competitive. We do 31 this year, so so
Good,
shout out
good.
to Quran, shout out to
Yeah,
Jocelyn, wonderful
yeah,
women who
yeah.
have, again, without them, who would we be? So I appreciate that.
Yeah, no question. Thanks for asking. She'll be pleased and I'm pleased with that. Thank you. It's
So
great.
now this shift
Yeah,
to
the shift.
medicine.
Oh my goodness. I tell you so much I can say about this. Yeah, my idea going into Xavier was to be a doctor. I will
Mhm,
say, with hindsight, my interest in that was not really as pure around sort of being a physician and
mhm,
a server in healthcare as it was the idea of what a doctor represents in society
mhm,
as a successful, smart individual that's looked to for different things. And so that's what I was resonating with. And some people won't know this. I got into medical school. I mean, I did well at Xavier. I got a scholarship to Baylor
yeah,
College of Medicine. And I went to medical school. I enrolled in medical school in my hometown in Houston. Uh, I went through year one. I went through with some struggle. I went through part of year two, quite frankly, with more struggle. And again, on hindsight, a lot of this is so crystal clear. Absolutely had nothing to do, with academic prowess, which was
mhm.
appreciate because that was kind of a dissonant thing for me, having come from Xavier so successfully and then getting to Baylor. By the way, that point was only proven to me after I succeeded by going to Harvard,
Right.
two
Amen.
Harvard graduate programs. So that let
That's
me
right.
know what that. It was all around just kind of my focus and my interest or my lack of focus during that time
Mhm.
that got me derailed from that. And I and my wife always say, I mean, you're where you're supposed to be. God has a plan for you. She'll tell me now, you would have been a horrible physician based on how I know you. But I don't know if I agree with that. That's probably not true based on what I've learned
That's
about
another
me.
podcast. I'm gonna
But
interview her
but
next.
but that began um, a journey for me of thinking really creatively about who I am and really what I want, what my skills
Mhm,
are, what table. And it wasn't a clear thing from there to this. It sort of still meandered.
mhm,
But I will
mhm,
say that, and I'll also say I used every element of the experience of the process of wanting to be a doctor, going through pre med
mhm,
and medical school in my life after that.
mhm,
I went on, to work in a business context for a number of years in healthcare. I
mm.
worked in an investment environment within the context of the healthcare industry.
Cool.
So I tried to find ways to bridge the gap between what I had done so that the story I was telling people where I was right then wasn't sounding crazy. Like, wait a minute, you came from here and now you're over here.
That's right.
I mean, I
That's
had
right.
to be creative and think of a narrative that made this path make sense and allow people to buy into what I was selling to them relative to, what I wanted to do going forward.
That's
And
right.
that's a skill set, quite frankly, that has just been critical to my success in a lot of other areas. And
Yeah.
I brought that. So that's the beginning. Yeah. And then that pivoted me that was a pivot from sort of the clinical aspect of medicine to then the sort of business aspect of things around the container of healthcare. And then all the way through, I owned a healthcare products company for a number of years and that I acquired and sold uh, on to now where I'm really not dealing with healthcare
That's
at
right.
all, other than some firms that I consult, to one
That's
of my clients is a big healthcare system that I work with, but that's it in the business context.
Wow, that's amazing. And one of the words you mentioned or concepts was struggle. You know, I really want to say this to everybody because we're talking through the lens of two African American men, but we're all the same. So if you want to be successful, diversify your experiences. So whether you're white, brown, any color, diversify so that a person who's not us will be able to navigate the world. Beyond that, the struggle part, right? So this guy who found his foundation of academic success at Xavier, uh, who we thought was just who came there this way, he struggled. There was some struggle, and again, I mentioned earlier that Xavier was rigorous in terms of preparing us to. And this is the funny part: you struggled, got through the struggle in the top 10 in the class with your lovely wife, and then you go to medical school and you struggle. Like would I would expect you not to struggle, and I know I struggled. I almost didn't make it through. I remember that second after the second year, and I struggled in biochemistry, which is ironic because a lot of this low carb stuff I talk about requires knowledge of biochemistry, and I love biochemistry now, but I struggled, and I was one class away from not being a doctor, right? So, and then you go to this completely different environment, so and you struggle. So I just think struggle is expected. And we had a storm that came through Chicago. And when I say storm, it was just how in the South, it's like this, just like in New Orleans, it'll just whoosh, and then it goes away, right? And we had one of those, and that's kind of what struggle is. It's going to be a tough moment, and you got to get through, get your umbrella, get shelter, but then you'll come on the other side of that storm. And I think that that's what life's about. So what I found at Xavier is that people who didn't make it were the people who just gave up. They just,
Yep.
if you just hang in there,
Yep.
you'll probably get through the storm. So for anybody checking this out, whether we're talking about diet, exercise, how we think, get through the struggle, relationships, and then you'll be okay. Just don't give up. And I think that that's true. So let's have a little fun. One of the things we also have in common is the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, and it took me a minute to kind of encourage you. And you're smart. You say, I'm not going to do this serious dating thing until my senior year. I'm not going to deal with this fraternity stuff. So you took care of business first, and that's a lesson to people out there. Don't forget why you came to school. You didn't go to school to necessarily find your life partner, and we were blessed to. You came there to get a degree. Do that first. Yeah, and I shout out to all the people who are out there protesting. It's okay to do these things, but don't forget why you're there. If you're protesting and you fell out of school, your voice becomes smaller. So
Right.
do the academic first while doing those other things if you're able to, but never sacrifice your future. So one of the our favorite hymns from the fraternity is "College Days Swiftly Pass."
Yes.
Woo, they really do.
Man.
Imbued
Oh
with
man.
memories fond,
Memories on.
and the
Man, I love it.
recollection slowly fades
Slowly fade.
away. Our renowned AFIA and dear fraternal bond, may they ever abide and with us stay. So,
Oh man.
so the fraternity, the one thing I got from fraternity, I think is this idea that I can do more than what I thought. So when I ran for and became the junior class president, didn't really, I don't know that I maximized that role as much as I could have, but just the idea that I would run for a junior class president was rooted in being around brothers who were doing stuff. Our dean was an alpha, our
Yeah.
student government president was an alpha. I mean, you look at all of the leadership roles historically and present.
The
Um,
president of the college was an alpha.
so it's like, so you then, and you're sitting there hanging out with people who look like you, and you then say, well, I know this guy and he seems normal. I can do it. So for me, one of the greatest gifts of being in a fraternity was the confidence to be a leader. So when you think about the journey you've had, what role did the fraternity play in making you who you are?
Yeah, good question. And I'll start by, saying this. I mean, not as big a role as it should have. I mean, so, and again, another rooted context. My grandfather was an alpha.
Hmm. Oh,
So,
wow.
and that was sort of my first knowledge of that, and I didn't really know a lot about that until many years later. I mean, I didn't see him doing or being an alpha per se. I knew he was one years later, but I will say this: there's a tremendous opportunity there, and most people probably have availed themselves to the full benefit of being in a brotherhood or sisterhood like a sorority.
Hmm.
And I have as well at times in my life. So here's an example. I was quite active, or as active as I've been in fraternity after college, uh, right uh, prior to my our kids being born. Because I had a lot of time, and I was in Massachusetts, and I was rising kind of professional, and it was just the proper context. And then life happens. My kids came into effect, and I got quite frankly distracted with other things, and was always aware and had the fraternity to the side, but was not really active in it. Now, my wife, on the other hand, who's an AKA, is very active and has sort of remained
Hmm.
such. So we're very different in that way. Long-winded answer. It has not for me, and it's shame on me. I was actually thinking about this as I was preparing to have this conversation and looking at some of the questions we talk about. Is you know that's been for me, frankly, probably a lost opportunity, but not
Hmm.
lost forever. I mean, I am encouraged to dig back in now that my kids were empty nesters and our kids are away. But and because of what you said, I mean, I pledged the fraternity during the fall of my senior year.
That's
That
right.
only left me kind of the remainder of that in the
That's
spring to
right.
experience it as university. And so much of Greek life at an HBCU is foundationally, primarily initially about the experience
That's
on
right.
campus. And I just
That's
got a
right.
a
Just a little
snippet of
bit.
that, which was
That's
which
right.
was which was great, but not what you had, which was
That's
two
right.
years of it. I mean, you did,
That's right.
did it before, and so that influenced or filtered the influence for me
Hmm.
as well. Um, if so, that's what I'll say about the return. If I could, if you would mind, the way you started talking about sort of struggle, I wanted to just double click on one thing you said, because I think it's important. Um, and I've used this term a couple of times during this podcast, is crucibles.
Yeah.
And they're basically, things you go through, trials, tribulations. If you kind of, look up what crucibles mean, and I have literally compiled a list, which I keep on my phone under notes. And each time something happens, I kind of assess, that's meaningful, that makes me take a turn in life. If it's a left turn or it's a right turn, I've listed it. And I have about probably 20 things from the time I was born
Mm-hmm.
that I go through. And Xavier, getting into Xavier was one of them. Struggling in medical school and ultimately
Hmm.
having withdraw from medical school was one. These are all life changing things. I think it's important to um, understand that. The second thing you described is perseverance, and I think that's
Hmm.
another just key thing which led to us starting the conversation that led to this podcast, is about some people that that have been in my life, black men, right, specifically, that have had challenges that I've been aware of, and for reasons that I'm beginning to appreciate and understand more and more each day, have responded to those challenges in ways that look like um, not inability to move forward,
Mm.
or inability to really cope in a way that's productive and positive.
Mhm.
You know, um, you always have a choice, and then there's a mental component of the activity around a choice, and then there's an emotional component. The
Right.
mental component is maybe easier intellectually. Yeah, I need to, snap out of it. I need to kind of
Mhm.
get around people that can support me. I need to continue to move forward. I gotta be prayerful, or whatever it is that it takes for you to move forward. And then emotionally, some people just can't do it. It's just a
Mhm.
difficult thing. And it could be depression people suffer with, which is real. It could be anxiety. It could be mental illness. I mean, which is a real thing, obviously. And so that's really, I think, what defines the path you take. Because you're right, we all are going to struggle. We're all going to have things that are really devastating, and that have the
Mhm.
power, quite frankly, if you give it to stop you in your tracks, to make you
Mhm.
crawl up into a ball and get in the corner and just give up at least, and at worst, really give up, which I know some people who've done that as well, like give up
Right.
on life, which is tragic. So again, I needed to step back and double click on that, because that is so much of what led to this conversation, is
Yeah.
my dealing with more than one, more than two individuals who are our peers in terms of our age group, being male, being black, that have really struggled, and have really struggled to continue to move forward
That's
in a
right.
way that seems healthy.
That's right. Well, I think let's peel back that onion even more. And I think that's an important conversation to have. Even before we do that, I want you to never, don't feel guilt, because literally, I'm not making this up. Shout out to, just imagine now we were on different lines. Obviously, I pledged before you, but on one, in terms of locally in Chicago, we have Dr. Clarence Red, who went into orthodontist, a great brother that's in the Illinois area. Dr. Pete Thomas, Dr. Bonnie Pete Thomas, who also is a doctor like myself. And then we have Daryl Bush,
Yeah,
who is a pastor, lawyer. If you just think about those, just us four, it's a lot of really good things came out of that line of brothers who pledged. Shout out to our other brothers. And we lost one brother, Reggie, who passed away. And, it breaks your heart that one of your brothers passed away. But having said that, we're gonna meet maybe a month from this recording, maybe a little bit past a month, and we're gonna have one of our first meetings in a while. Now we live in the same area geographically, but yet we haven't been hanging out. So there's never a time that's too late. We'll probably start by socializing each other first, and then we may start to be more active. But like you, I put family first. I felt like I was too busy. I need to get my career on track. I need to take care of these babies who are now adults. So I think that but the foundation we got and the love we have for the fraternity will never go away. So I think I'm going to do like you and start to maybe look at that and say, how can I get moving that direction? But going back to this struggle and the inequitable society we live in. And I was literally listening to an episode where Roland Martin had been a guest on a more conservative show. And I love the fact that Roland, I don't agree with everything Roland says, but he went to this platform, and I think Roland's intelligent. I think the platform he was on was, some intelligent conservatives, but he talked a little bit about, I think the New York Times had put something out there about house discrimination. And it was just basically fact that there was some house discrimination issues that we deal with in America. For example, if I sell my home and I'm in the basement of my home right now, I need to take down the pictures of African American folk, right? And
yeah,
and as Roland shared the data that suggests there's not just isolated racism, but systemic. This guy just could not, for the life of him, that didn't resonate when he said, "No, that's just isolated." And even faced with facts, it's So what I want to talk a little bit about is this idea of living in a world where some of us may face struggles that others don't face. And again, I think we all face struggle, right? But navigating that is very challenging, even when faced with facts. People don't want to; they just want to act like it never existed. So, when you think about the struggles that people face that deal with things like housing, employment, the fact that disproportionately men of color are in prison maybe at 5 times the rate as white men, and black women twice the rate, and the impact that has on not just that person, but their families, because now it's harder to be employed. Now it's harder to integrate into society. So when you think about those concepts, what comes to mind?
Yeah, yeah, so many things. So, obviously, I can't argue with anyone who thinks that there's no systemic. I mean, that's just an illogical,
Right.
thought in my view. I mean, I can't even position myself to, begin justifying that. But the paradox for me, and the interesting thing is that, um, and I was thinking about this, how do you fight that? How do you come across that? And I've been in
Right.
most of the professional environments I've been in, and at least half of the academic environments that I've been in, both of which I've been successful in, have been with me kind of, for many people in the room, being like the only black person that they have
Right.
seen in this context. And so
Right.
being aware that, and for some people, that's a big, mantle to carry, and they don't want that responsibility. In fact, some
Right.
people will say that, listen, it's not my job to, acclimate you,
Right.
deal. Um, and that can be, but the reality is you are acclimating them, whether or not you think it's your job.
Right.
And
Right.
so having that knowledge and appreciating the fact that everything you do, from how you, sit in a meeting to how you communicate, influences that. And I'm not saying this from the standpoint that, we have control over it, but I'm saying it influences people's psychology, and largely the people who are doing the discriminating. And it has a dual effect. And
Hmm.
they don't often, sometimes they don't work in concert. They work against each other. Here's what I mean by that. The more you develop yourself, or the more I represent myself in these contexts as being who I am, the
Hmm.
more folks might be inclined to think, okay, we've leveled it out. Look at him. He's over there, and he's, and so there's, an easier time of them saying, we're in a post-racial, post-discrimination,
Right.
because of, look
Right.
at Dobbin, he's now the head of this thing, and yep,
That's
we've had
right.
Obama, we've got this thing. So it kind of, you need to continue to strive. People do this, and at the same time, you're also educating people who think, all black people are idiots, or whatever
Right.
they might think.
Right.
And you're like,
Right.
oh, wait a minute, here's someone who is not. So let me, and I do like Dobbin, nice guy. We go get beers. And so, let me change my perspective here on, the next brother that walks into my office that's looking for a scholarship. And let me think about Dobbin and say, oh, well, maybe this
That's
is Dobbin's son or Dobbin's nephew. So let me at least listen to what this dude is saying. I mean, I'm kind of making light of it, but that's how change happens. That's how the psychology of it happens,
hmm
and it leads to sort of familiarity, right? So
hmm
this comes from things that people are not aware of. I mean, people who think that there's no discrimination, or that, we're opposed, their experience, has been such that that's reinforced. And
That's
so,
right. That's right.
yeah, so a lot there, a lot there. It's a lot, and we're in sort of I think we're in a period in society, in the world. I don't know how long it will last. It's probably going to
Hmm.
be a period of time, because this is evolutionary. But we're overlapping. I mean, we've come from an extreme of real disparity, where you can really see the difference between this and this, to a lot of blurry and even confusion, which is where I think we are not right now. I mean, we're in a confused, overlapping, um, dissonant sort of place, which is sort of I'm hoping, I'm prayerful that it's the messy before we sort it out into
That's right.
organization, which will probably be beyond my and your generation. It will
That's
probably be
right.
left up to our kids and our grandkids to move us beyond this,
That's right.
because their mindsets are colored by what I just said, in a
That's
way
right.
that's different than our parents'
That's right.
experience was in the 60s
That's right. Completely
and the
different.
50s. So, anyway,
Yeah.
that's my sense of it.
Yeah, and I think about it in terms of what I hear. Like, so I recently learned that I'm not sure if it was a specific um, school or Ivy League schools, but I did hear that a large percentage of the first year class at some of these top schools were legacy, right? So if that's true, there's favor given to legacy folk that's not
Hmm.
given to other folk. Number one. Number two, if um, I'm looking for a job and I'm from an institution like WashU, my alumni may help to make that transition easier. And or if my dad is Tony or Dobbin, I'm being honest. My wife was able to, because she's very aggressive. That's why we love our sisters. We were at an event and she, just randomly walks up to someone who was clearly the leader at the table and was like, my son needs a job. So literally 2-3 months after that conversation, uh, my son has a job. So my point is that there are various factors that give us favor. And that's why one of my favorite books is called The Proximity Principle, because it talks about how you need to be proximal to the people who can impact your life. So if anybody's checking this out, do we believe in education? 100%. My guest, Dobbin, has gone to a great historically Black school. He's gone to Harvard. We believe in education, has multiple degrees from Harvard. I have an MBA. I have a master's in nutrition beyond the MD. So I'm big fans. But one thing that is always true, that'll always pale in comparison to relationships. And one of the biggest barriers to people who struggle, people of color, etc., is that they don't have these relationships. So it's important, if you're in a position of having the ability to help people get ahead, it's important that you do things to make that happen. I recently went to something called I Am Able, which raises awareness about the medical profession as an example, because most people don't know that only 2% of doctors in America are Black men, only 2%. And in 1974, there was about, I don't know, 1,400 or so applications for Black men to get into medical school. And guess how many they had in 2023? The same
I mean,
number. Same
really?
number. Yeah, so
Wow.
2% back then and 2% today. Now you can
Wow.
argue that's just a coincidence. You can, but I would argue it's systemic racism and lacking people like myself and you in front of people that's saying, yes, you can. Yes, you
Hmm.
can. And so we have a lot of work to do. And by lifting other people up, you do not make it more challenging for those who don't require that lifting. There's enough space in the world for everybody because there's a percentage of us for various reasons who will be given opportunity and won't have the capacity to take advantage of it. And it's not because they're not wanting it. It's just circumstances. I mean, life is hard, but to then not allow people who want to be successful to not have the opportunity to be successful is where we fail. And I just think that if I am able to have somebody like Dobbin in front of me, uh, I would prefer to have somebody like Dobbin in front of me, but maybe there's versions of Dobbin that required help. So let's make sure, because then we can have conversations at the board table that address perspectives that would not have been addressed. And therefore, we're like, why are we failing as a health system? Why do we have so many, infant mortality rates this high among women of color? Well, because we haven't addressed it and we didn't recognize it. And so but somebody at the table who has some experience in that space may have made that known. Therefore, we do things to mitigate that. So again, we're going to work towards that. But I'm glad you shared your perspective. I'm also curious about your global vision of the definition of a man, right? And I know this is very much through the lens of just you right now, but as we're trying to, you know, uh, overcome the expectations of society and tried to be successful. Sometimes they say we got to be strong and masculine. When you think about what a man should look like, what would you say is some of the things that you like to see a man, what characteristics would you like to see?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That's complex, and I think again, like everything, it has evolved for me to the extent that I've really consciously thought about that conceptually. What it means to
Hmm.
be a. I mentioned earlier that most of the strongest people emotionally
Hmm.
uh, in my past experience have been black women.
Hmm.
That's not to say I've had black men in my life. I mean, I have uncles and that have been present at different times, and other male figures that have been there. But that and that has colored my perception a bit. But I have to say, I didn't spend probably a lot of time thinking about that as I was growing up because I probably
Hmm.
didn't even know if I considered myself sort of full-fledged kind of grown man until now. I mean,
Hmm.
where I'll say that my sense of that is clearer and more defined just because of life circumstance and life experience. And so an example of that, and it also colored by things that you've gone through. I think a man has to have experienced some things that they've had to navigate. And I
That's
think
right.
earlier in my life, I was just sort of marching along in step, kind of painting by the numbers and in order. And so I hadn't really done anything but kind of stayed on the track in chronology. When things started to kind of shift, and then you have to start to be creative and think about, okay, here's where I'm standing now, and here's where I want to be. Let me get a strategy in place, and we think about how to do this. Um, and I'm not talking just career wise, I'm talking about your life. Uh,
Hmm.
that to me begins to define man thinking. And then when you're, and not just man, as women do the same thing, but I'm defining it in the context of me. Uh, and then when you have, you bring kids into the world and their
Mm.
infants, that's one element of sort of manhood. And then when they get to be grown, I mean, I have a 22-year-old daughter and a 25-year-old son.
Mm.
Conversations we have now and the way they look at me and the way they appreciate kind of struggles when I have them that they didn't when they were 5, um, also brings me more sharply into focus of what it means to be a man. My daughter literally is, without context, she's here now. She's with me in North Carolina where I have a business. I split my time between here and Boston, but the conversations we have and just her context of me in the experience of an adult and she being an adult um, really defines more my idea of what it means for me to be a man and responsible,
Hmm.
a father in my household. And so that's really the way I define it. And so you've also noticed probably that I've defined it really in the context of just what you're saying, proximity, people around me, my family. I haven't
Right.
really thought about it as much in the context of society,
Hmm.
um, other than my resonating with the notion of what it means to be a black man in society, just based on what you just described, by people's perceptions, by people, um, the diversity that you bring, your perspective,
That's
uh,
right.
the responsibility to speak up when there's something that impacts you or your people or might. Um, that's all I think responsible, and for the context of me and manly behavior.
That's right. I like that. And I know we started off with talking about the E in the ROPE acronym, life experiences. And I agree with you. Like, as we evolve as humans, our life experiences will shape how we perceive the world and how the world perceives us. And then we take that and we use that to kind of, frame our responses to the world in a way that serves hopefully us and the world. And I've evolved, man. I'm still evolving. And I just think men just have to be comfortable in their own skin and just be comfortable being who you are. And you don't have to be like me. You don't have to be like Dobbin. Just be yourself, be authentically. I was watching one of the episodes, one of the comedies, and the character in the show was really trying to be the funny guy in the room. He was kind of known for that, and then this funnier guy came along, and this guy was, doing voices, right? So he's tried to start doing voices so he can be as funny. And his wife was like, "Can you just be yourself?" And then he went back to being himself, and he was funny again. So I'm just gonna be Tony. I want Dobbin to just be Dobbin, and because we're different, we may have things in common, but that's what makes it really cool, right? And so being a man may just be being authentic, being authentically yourself. And as you evolve even further, you may tweak it a little bit because you may hear something from myself or Dobbin that may help you tweak it, but it's okay. And there's no right or wrong. It just is. So I just appreciate that perspective, and I'm really loving it, man. And another thing about you I've always loved, and I try to be this way, is just being, glass half full mentality. You're also very thoughtful. So you take your time, you think through your decisions and your responses, but you also just your tone is more positive. So where do you think you got that from? Because for me, I've kind of always been that way, but I don't know if it's a way to just navigate the world and feel better about the world, but I always try to say, well, how can we look at this more positive? So what's been your experience with that?
So let me be honest with you. Thank you for saying that because that's my goal.
Yeah.
Um, I will call it a goal because I'm in pursuit of it. I mean, the
Right.
reality is, and my wife will tell you this because she's far more optimistic and glass, half full than I am. I will say this honestly, and this is part of the mask or the facade or the cope that even I do. I mean, my natural inclination. Remember, I talked about intellectual and emotional. My natural inclination intellectually is to be positive and
Mm-hmm.
glass half full. But emotionally, I find myself many times in the thick of the battle or at the initiation part of a struggle, not naturally being there, having to get myself there. So it's a
Mhm.
practice having to say, you know what? Here we are. Okay, we've got a challenge here. I got a choice, and that's the other part of this. A choice. I can either crawl up in a ball and get in the corner, call it quits on life and today, or I can decide, you know what, this sucks, and this is not at all what I.
Right.
This is going to be a struggle. This is really not good. So now, you know, what can we do? What can happen here? How can I get out of this? What's good? And that's a practice
That's
that
right.
I literally work and work on every day. So I'm
That's right.
glad it comes across as and I speak about it. I mean, I talk to teams about it, and so you don't have to be an expert at it to kind of understand it and know how the mechanism works. Be an expert practitioner of it. So it's just a practice, is all I'll say.
That's
And
right.
and and I think you have to decide that you want to you know, move forward and
That's
and
right.
be positive and optimistic. Or you can decide not to and go that path. But it will be, you're setting the context.
That's
I'm
right.
learning. I'm learning.
Well, I know with your previous work with Harvard that you served as a coach,
Yeah,
and in that role, you had to, frame things a certain
yeah,
way.
sure.
Now, so one thing I want to do as we're kind of wrapping up, um, I wanted to ask you about the what you're currently doing because it's not exactly the same as what you've done with Harvard, but it's your own business.
Yep.
So let my audience know what you're doing now, partly because I want them to understand who you are better, but also maybe there's some people out there that need to use your services. So talk a little bit about your current life in the world of business.
Yeah, yeah. So I do a lot of things. I tell you, I probably have three buckets that I'm involved with primarily. One of them is a business that I own here in North Carolina. I referred to it a moment ago. My family's from here. I own a fast food restaurant national brand that I built during the pandemic on some family land. My family's been in business here
That's a crazy
since
time to
the
build it.
30s. Yeah, it was crazy. It was actually that was the opportunity. So that's a
Wow.
whole nother podcast. But
Right.
I spent a fair amount of time on that. I have a team that leads it. It's great, and they're
Okay.
doing great stuff. We're trying to grow it. The other element of what I do is around what I call sort of facilitation consulting, and that's what you're describing. So I have some clients that I deal with, some pretty meaningful clients that are great. All of the work involves working with individuals and
Hmm.
teams,
Okay.
helping them to be optimal and achieve high performance. And then I do some real estate that is involved in some of the stuff that I have as well. So I've got a renovation project going on next door here.
Cool.
So those are my buckets and sort of my post retirement, if you will. And I joke when I say that I'm not retired by any stretch. I just am no longer formally part of Harvard, where I was for nearly 20 years. But thanks
Yeah,
for asking.
it's funny to no problem, to think about retirement, and at 56 this year,
Yeah.
I it's just weird. So I know my wife will probably move towards some acting from pharmacy at some point. I'll probably do this work I'm doing longer. Part of my retirement will be this work we're doing now, which is to grow the YouTube and podcast so that we can spread messages of healing. I think that's my life purpose.
Nice.
But I'm looking forward to also just the travel and the life experiences have yet to be to the Grand Canyon. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I haven't even done that. So have a lot of experiences to look forward to. So two kind of final questions. One is, you know, what question would you have wanted me to ask you? And then we'll ask you how you plan to protect your nest. In other words, when you think about my nest, my nutrition, exercise, less stress, more sleep, how we think, recovering from trauma and the rope, relationships, being supportive of your journey, avoiding organisms and pollutants that can harm you, and of course, making sure your life experiences and your emotions are serving you when you think about that. So let's talk about anything that you'd want to share with my audience, and then, of course, how you plan to protect your nest over the next 12 months.
Yeah, yeah. So again, thanks for asking. No, this has just been a wonderful reconnection, Tony, and I think a great conversation that has progressed naturally and organically. I think we've covered all the elements that we spoke about
That's
uh,
right.
very thoroughly, and I think we've planted some seeds in the minds of hopefully some of your listeners to at least begin to think about themselves in the context of the conversation we just had. Um, and then a word you just used a moment ago, which we did not discuss, and it's one that I'm literally thinking about right now at 55 and evolving around, is what your purpose in life is and why you're here. um, People have written books, your why, what's your why, all this. I think that's critical. And it evolves. That's another thing. What your purpose is, or at least in your mind today, is not what it was when you were 21 at
That's
Xavier,
right.
or even when you were 31
Hmm.
after Xavier. And so I think that's important always to ask. If you ask me that, I'm scripting some stuff now, but I'm really, it's evolving, it's changing.
That's right.
And so, it's a journey. It's a
That's
journey, and you
right.
have to experience it. And then you also said be in the present, which is another thing. Stay in the present. Try to
Stay in the
stay
present.
in the moment and
That's right.
experience everything that you're experiencing.
That's right. Love it. And so, are you like, I know I talk to people and they say, well, I'm really working on exercise. I'm working on my sleep, my stress reduction. So where's your focus over the next 12 months? Because there's so many
Yeah,
things to work on.
yeah. So I want to live to be 111.
Okay.
And
That's
I
good.
say that, I'm serious. I said that to you a couple of years ago
That's
when I
right.
started calling you, asking you about, anti-inflammatories. But
That's right.
I'm not joking. My grandmother lived to be 104, and
Nice.
I saw an article about a woman living to be so. So that's really, I mean, my goal is, I picked that number out. I mean, at least 111. And so, you can't just say that. I mean, you have to kind of work towards that. So
That's
one of the
right.
things that I've started to do over the last 12 months and have persisted, which has been great. And, people don't know me in context. I'm my college weight right now. I
Hmm.
weigh what I weighed in college. My diet, you've helped me with a lot of this. I try to, eat, I'm experimenting with plant-based during the week, and I eat, kind of fully on the weekend.
That's
I
right.
run, I run probably, 10 to 15 miles a week, nothing crazy. Um, and I sleep well. I try to do that, and I try to celebrate life every day. I mean, I live,
That's right.
every day, like it's my birthday.
That's what I'm
Uh,
talking
so
about.
so I think that's or at least I try to. That's my attitude. I don't always succeed in it, but I think that's where it is, and it's serving me well. I feel really good. I don't have a pain, as my grandmother used to always say. Um, and I'm blessed, man. I'm physically, mentally, emotionally, blessed. I like to always say, man, I don't have a problem that money can't solve, and that's a blessing, because a lot of people have problems
Mhm.
that money can't solve, and those are the
That's
worst.
right.
But
That's
I
right.
don't have a problem that money can't solve, and I don't have a lot of problems. So,
That's
so
what I'm
all of
talking about. So I love it, man, and I appreciate you. And to my low carb audience, don't forget he was at Harvard, so it's a whole lot of plant folk.
that's right. Yeah, don't disregard what I said.
That's
Go get a
right.
steak, and in fact, I ate a
That's right.
beautiful ribeye last night, and it was
That's
just
well,
fabulous.
amen to that. So it's all good. We need a little variety. So thank you, man. This is definitely what I was hoping it would be, and I really enjoyed it. I will promise you that I plan to reinvigorate, reactivate the relationship we have. I can say with confidence that the relationship we've had as friends is so valuable to me. I think we're missing an opportunity to kind of nurture that even more. So periodically, if a couple of times a year, quarterly, whatever, we're going to connect. And I think anybody checking this out, if you have a really good friend who adds value, more time should be spent with them. And if you have people who are not adding value, less time should be spent with them, with all due respect. So I think that's the way to go. So thank you so much for joining me for my anniversary episode of the podcast. And I just really enjoyed every moment. So thank you, my brother.
Thank you for allowing me to celebrate it with you, man. This is great.
Absolutely.
Congratulations, man. You're doing great work in the
Thank
world and
you.
in your life, man. You're a blessing.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's been a gift for me, and I will continue to do that. And so, as we wrap up, guys, today we celebrated the 200th episode with a guest who has had a significant impact on my journey to become a doctor. So I'm so happy we crossed paths and we did it just when I needed the most. And you've learned, and I've learned that maybe that path has impacted his life as well. So
No question.
I'm really looking forward to this lifelong relationship with Dobbin, and we'll continue to share our various experiences as we navigate life's waters. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as you learned a little bit about Dobbin today. And I hope that your conversation, or our conversation provides a broader perspective that will serve you the next time you run into a Dobbin or a Tony on your life's journey. So until we do this again, guys, I really appreciate you just taking time to be with us and being on just checking us out. It really warms my heart that people actually listen to me and my guests, and it's surreal to me sometimes when I think about it. So I really appreciate that. So as we wrap up this episode of the Protecting Your Nest podcast, I only ask that you continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.